He let her go. He stood behind the bulletproof glass of his penthouse office, a king in a sterile, silent castle, and watched her walk away. The Seoul rain fell in relentless gray sheets, blurring the city into a watercolor of bleeding neon and slick asphalt. She was just a small figure, her shoulders hunched under the inadequate protection of her thin coat, the one bright thing in his world being systematically erased by the downpour. Each step she took away from him was a physical blow, a fresh fissure in the foundation of the man he had briefly allowed himself to become. He could have stopped her. A word, a command, and his men would have brought her back, gently or not, it made no difference. He had the power to lock her in this gilded cage forever. But the part of him that she had unearthed, the part that remembered how to feel something other than duty and emptiness, knew that caging her would be the same as killing her. So he stood, his hands fisted at his sides, and let the only good thing in his life walk out into the storm. The silence she left behind was louder than any gunshot, more final than any verdict. It was the sound of his own damnation, returning to claim him. 3 months earlier, the world had been a different kind of loud. For Sohana, it was the clatter of plates, the impatient shouts of a head chef, and the constant, grinding hum of a city that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you from giving up. She balanced a tray laden with dirty dishes, her wrist aching in protest as she navigated the cramped, chaotic kitchen of a 5-star hotel. This wasn't her job, not really. Her real job was as a cashier at a struggling convenience store. This was her third job, a catering gig she picked up whenever her roommate, Sora, heard of an opening. Anything for a few extra won. Anything to keep their shoebox apartment and her flickering dream of being a painter alive. "Hannah, move it," the manager barked, his face a mask of sweat and stress. "The Golden Dragon Syndicate's party is on the main floor. Nothing can go wrong, you understand? Nothing." Hannah nodded, her expression carefully blank. The Golden Dragon Syndicate. She'd heard the name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. Officially, they were the Golden Dragon Group, a sprawling chaebol with interests in shipping, construction, and technology. Unofficially, everyone knew their roots ran deeper, into darker, more dangerous soil. They were the modern face of Seoul's underworld, polished to a corporate sheen, but just as lethal. And tonight, she was serving them canapés. She pushed through the swinging doors and into the ballroom. The change was dizzying. The kitchen's frantic energy was replaced by the smooth, decadent thrum of a string quartet and the low murmur of 100 powerful voices. The air smelled of expensive perfume and even more expensive ambition. Men in tailored suits worth more than her annual income stood in tight clusters, their laughter sharp and predatory. Women dripped with jewels that could have paid her rent for a decade, their smiles as bright and hard as the diamonds around their necks. Hannah felt a familiar pang of invisibility, the defense mechanism of the working poor. Head down, do the job, don't be seen. From his vantage point on a slightly elevated dais, Kwon Ji-hoon saw everything and felt nothing. The party was in his honor, a celebration of his official appointment as the new head of the syndicate, his father, finally, reluctantly, stepping back. But it felt less like a coronation and more like the formal shackling of his soul. He was 29 years old, and his life was already over, its path carved in stone by the generations of ruthless men who came before him. He sipped his whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to dull the profound boredom that had become his constant companion. His father, Chairman Kwon, stood nearby, his presence a cold weight in the room. The old man's eyes scanned the crowd, not with pride for his son, but with the calculating gaze of a warlord surveying his territory. "You look displeased, Ji-hoon," his father said, his voice a low gravel. "You should be smiling. This is your kingdom now." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Kingdom. It was a prison built of money and blood. "I am merely observing," he replied, his tone flat. He felt 1,000 eyes on him, assessing him, measuring him against his formidable father. They were all vultures, waiting for a sign of weakness. His gaze swept the room, gliding over the sycophants and the schemers, the beautiful, empty faces. It was a sea of sameness, a performance of power he had witnessed his entire life. And then, his eyes stopped. It happened in an instant. A server, a girl, moving through the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes. She was different. Not in the obvious, polished way of the women here. Her hair was tied back in a simple, slightly messy ponytail. Her uniform was standard black and white, but she wore it with a kind of weary dignity. There was a smudge of something, paint maybe, on her cheekbone. She was utterly, completely out of place. And for the first time all night, Ji-hoon felt a flicker of something other than suffocating ennui. Hana was trying to navigate a particularly dense knot of guests when a man, laughing too loudly, stumbled backward. He bumped her arm, just enough to upset the delicate balance of her tray. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the flutes tilt, a graceful, terrible arc of crystal and gold. She tried to correct, her muscles screaming, but it was too late. The crash was explosive in the refined atmosphere, a symphony of shattering glass. The music faltered. Conversations died. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the sound. Mortification washed over Hana, hot and sickening. A dozen champagne flutes lay in a glittering, bubbly ruin at her feet. She could feel the manager's rage from across the room, a palpable wave of heat. 2 burly security guards in black suits immediately started moving toward her, their faces grim. This was it. She was going to be fired, blacklisted, and probably have the cost of the glasses docked from the pay she so desperately needed. Her body went rigid, with a familiar mix of fear and defiance. Fine, let them come. But before they reached her, something else happened. The man on the dais, the one everyone had been watching, the very center of the party's gravity, spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of the glass she had just broken. "Stop." Just one word. The security guards froze mid-stride, their professional impassivity momentarily broken by confusion. The string quartet went completely silent. The entire, glittering, powerful room held its breath. Kwon Ji-hoon felt the word leave his lips before he had even consciously decided to speak. It was an instinct, a primal, possessive urge to protect the fascinating, defiant creature who had just shattered the evening's crushing monotony. He had watched her as the man bumped into her. He had seen the flash of panic in her eyes, quickly replaced by a stubborn set of her jaw as she braced for the consequences. She didn't cower. She didn't burst into tears. She just stood there, amidst the wreckage, waiting for the axe to fall. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about her. But in that frozen moment, he knew one thing with absolute, world-altering certainty. He would not allow them to touch her. He descended from the dais, his movements fluid and unhurried, yet every person in the room parted before him like the Red Sea. The silence was absolute, save for the sound of his Italian leather shoes on the marble floor. He ignored the stunned faces of his guests, his father's tightening scowl, the terrified expression on the catering manager's face. His entire world had narrowed to the girl with the paint smudge on her cheek. Hana watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was him, the man from the stage, the new king. He was even more intimidating up close, tall, impossibly handsome in a way that was almost cruel, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. A faint, silvery scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made him look more dangerous. She braced herself, expecting a cold dismissal, a quiet, brutal order to have her thrown out. He stopped directly in front of her. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. He didn't look at the gawking crowd. He looked only at her. His dark eyes held hers, and for a terrifying second, Hana felt like he was looking not at her, but into her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was a low baritone, smoother than the whiskey in his glass, and it held a note of genuine concern that was so unexpected it almost knocked her off her feet. She could only shake her head, rendered mute. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he did something that sent a fresh wave of shock through the ballroom. He bent down, his flawlessly tailored suit creasing, and picked up one of the larger pieces of broken glass from the floor. He held it for a moment before placing it carefully on the edge of her now empty tray. He straightened up and turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the two frozen security guards. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Leave her." The guards flinched as if struck. "Yes, Mr. Kwan," they mumbled in unison, backing away hastily. Next, his eyes found the apoplectic catering manager. "This was an accident. She will be paid in full for the night. Add a bonus for the inconvenience. My office will handle it." The manager, pale and sweating, could only stammer, "Yes, of course, Mr. Kwan. Right away." Ji-hoon turned his attention back to Hana. The whole interaction had taken less than a minute, but the power dynamic of the entire room had been asserted, recalibrated, and focused on this one insignificant moment. On her. He had stopped the music. He had silenced the most powerful people in Seoul. For her. "You can go," he said to her, his voice softer now. "Someone will take care of this." He gestured vaguely at the mess. Hana finally found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. "I'm sorry. For the glasses." A strange, fleeting expression crossed his face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it softened the severe lines of his mouth. "It was the most interesting thing that has happened all evening," he said. "Don't be sorry." He held her gaze for one more impossibly long second before turning and walking back to the dais as smoothly as he had descended. He picked up his whiskey, and with a slight gesture to the conductor, the music swelled back to life. The conversations resumed, a little too loudly, a little too quickly. The incident was over. But it wasn't. For Hana, it was the beginning of a profound and terrifying confusion. For Ji-hoon, it was the beginning of everything. As he stood there, feigning interest in a conversation about shipping routes, he leaned toward his second-in-command, the ever-present, ever-loyal Park Min-jun. "The server," Ji-hoon said, his voice low and private. "The one who dropped the tray. I want her name. I want to know where she lives, where she works, what she dreams about at night. I want to know everything." Min-jun, who had known Ji-hoon his entire life, betrayed no surprise. He simply nodded. "It will be done." Ji-hoon took another sip of his whiskey. The boredom was gone. In its place was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A hunt. An obsession. Her name, he would learn, was Saw Hana, and he was going to have her. Hana stumbled back to the kitchen in a daze, ignoring the mix of fearful and envious stares from the other staff. The manager, now fawning and obsequious, told her she could leave, pressing a thick envelope of cash into her hand. It was more money than she made in a month. She walked out of the hotel and into the cool Seoul night, her mind reeling. She should have been terrified. A man with that much power, that much casual command over the world, was a dangerous thing. And he had noticed her. More than noticed her. He had singled her out, protected her, and looked at her with an intensity that had seared itself into her memory. She should have been running for the hills, but as she rode the late-night bus back to her tiny apartment, clutching the envelope of money, another feeling warred with her fear. A strange, unwelcome flutter of curiosity. A spark of something that felt dangerously like attraction. The man was a kingpin, a gangster in a suit. He was everything she should despise. So why couldn't she get the image of his dark, lonely eyes out of her head? "He did what?" Sora shrieked, nearly dropping the cup of ramen she was holding. Her eyes were wide, with a mixture of disbelief and vicarious excitement. He stopped the whole party? For you? Hana nodded, huddled on their lumpy sofa, recounting the story for the third time. He just said, stop, and everyone did. It was unnerving. Unnerving? Hana, it's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. It's like a drama. Sora fanned herself dramatically. And he's Kwon Ji-hoon, the Kwon Ji-hoon. He's practically royalty. Dark, scary, ridiculously handsome royalty. He's a criminal, Sora, Hana said, though her protest felt weak even to her own ears. His company is a front. He's a rich, powerful, handsome criminal who just saved you from humiliation and paid you a fortune for breaking a few glasses, Sora countered, waggling her eyebrows. Details, details. So, did you get his number? I got out of there as fast as I could, Hana mumbled, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. I don't want anything to do with men like that. But her dreams that night were filled with the sound of shattering glass and a pair of intense, dark eyes that saw too much. 2 days later, the first gift arrived. It wasn't flowers or chocolates. It was a professional-grade French-style art easel made of beautiful, smooth oak. With it came a complete set of imported oil paints, dozens of tubes in every conceivable color, and a roll of the finest Belgian linen canvas. There was no note. Hana and Sora stared at the delivery, which took up a significant portion of their tiny living room. Okay, Sora said slowly. This has to be him. How would he even know you paint? A cold knot of dread and something else, something warm and unsettling, formed in Hana's stomach. He must have had me investigated. The thought was violating. This is creepy, Sora. This is stalker-level creepy. It's a very expensive, very thoughtful level of creepy, Sora argued, gently touching the smooth wood of the easel. Hana, this is the kind of gear you've only dreamed of. She was right. It was. And that made it worse. It felt like a trap. A beautiful, thoughtful, expensive trap. Hana refused to use it. The easel stood in the corner of the room like a silent wooden monument to his intrusion. A week later, Hana received a frantic call from her mother, who lived in a small town hours outside of Seoul. Her mother had been struggling with mounting medical debt after a recent surgery. Hana, I don't understand, her mother cried, her voice thick with happy tears. I went to the hospital to make a payment and they said the entire bill has been paid, in full. An anonymous benefactor, they said. Hana's blood ran cold. She sank onto her bed, the phone pressed hard against her ear. Anonymous benefactor. She knew. She knew who it was. This was a different kind of power. Not just stopping a party, but reaching across the country to erase her family's burdens with a flick of his wrist. It was terrifying. It was suffocating. And a small, treacherous part of her felt a wave of profound relief. He was weaving a net around her, a net of gratitude and obligation, and she didn't know how to cut herself free. She decided to confront him. The only problem was she had no idea how. A man like Kwon Ji-hoon didn't have a number in the phone book. She couldn't exactly walk up to the gleaming, imposing Golden Dragon Tower and ask for him. As it turned out, she didn't have to. The next Saturday, she was sitting at her usual corner table in a small, quiet cafe near her apartment, sketching the faces of strangers in her worn notebook. It was her sanctuary, the one place she could afford a coffee and feel at peace. The bell over the door chimed, and she didn't look up until a shadow fell across her page. She tilted her head, ready to tell whoever it was to move, and her words died in her throat. It was him, Kwon Ji-hoon. Standing beside her table, dressed not in a sharp suit, but in dark jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater, that probably cost more than the cafe's monthly rent. He looked younger without the armor of his corporate attire, but no less intense. The scar over his eye seemed more prominent. "Hello, Hannah," he said. Her heart did a painful lurch. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. He knew everything. She snapped her sketchbook shut, her face hardening into a protective mask. "What do you want?" He didn't seem fazed by her hostility. He simply gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "May I?" "It's a free country," she clipped out, though the air suddenly felt anything but free. It felt charged, heavy, thick with his presence. He sat down, his movements economical and precise. He didn't order anything. He just watched her, his gaze unwavering. It was the same unnerving intensity from the party. Hannah couldn't stand the silence. "The easel, my mother's hospital bills," she said, her voice low and furious. "That was you." He didn't deny it. He just inclined his head. "I heard you were a painter. I heard your mother was ill." "You heard?" she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or you paid someone to dig through my entire life? This is creepy. What you're doing is not okay. Is it even legal?" A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. "Most women in your position would simply say thank you." "I'm not most women," she retorted, her chin high. "I don't want your money. I don't want your gifts. I want you to leave me alone." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. He was, she realized, completely unused to being told no. He was a man who reshaped reality to his will, and she, a broke cashier, was defying him. It was terrifying and, in a strange way, exhilarating. "I can't do that," he said finally, his voice quiet but absolute. "Why not?" she demanded. "Because," he said, leaning forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "From the moment I saw you standing in the middle of that ballroom, covered in broken glass and defiance, I have not been able to think of anything else." The raw honesty of his confession struck her harder than any threat. There was no artifice in his voice, just a simple, stark truth. Her carefully constructed anger began to crumble, replaced by a bewildering flurry of emotions. He saw the shift in her expression. "I apologize for my methods," he continued, and he sounded like he actually meant it. "It is the only way I know how to operate. By identifying a problem, your need for art supplies, your family's debt, and solving it. It was clumsy, impersonal." He paused, and a hint of vulnerability entered his eyes, a crack in the marble facade. "I would like to try a different way. The normal way." Hannah stared at him, suspicious. "What normal way?" "Take a walk with me," he said. "Just a walk. No gifts, no grand gestures, no bodyguards. Just you and me. And if, at the end of it, you still want me to leave you alone, I will." It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. He would never be able to leave her alone. But it was the only way to get her to say yes. He saw the war in her eyes, her principles against her curiosity, her fear against the undeniable pull that sizzled in the air between them. She thought of the lonely easel in her apartment. She thought of the relief in her mother's voice. She looked at the man in front of her, who commanded armies of men in suits, but was now asking, almost humbly, for a few minutes of her time. "Fine," she said, the word escaping her against her better judgment. "A walk. That's it." A genuine, breathtaking smile touched Kwon Ji-hoon's lips for the first time. It was like a punch to the chest. It transformed his harsh, handsome face into something devastatingly beautiful. And Hannah knew, with a sinking feeling of inevitability, that she was already lost. They walked. They didn't go to some exclusive private park. He let her lead, and she took them along the Cheonggyecheon stream, a ribbon of nature cutting through the concrete heart of the city. Tourists and families ambled along the pathways, and for the first time, Ji-hoon felt anonymous, normal. He had dismissed his driver and the subtle security detail that usually shadowed him. Min-jun had protested vehemently. "It's too risky, Ji-hoon." But Ji-hoon had been adamant. "If she is to trust me, she cannot see the cage." At first, the silence between them was thick with tension. But as they walked, it slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. "Why do you paint?" he asked, his hands in the pockets of his jeans. Hana was surprised by the simple question. No one ever asked her why. They asked if she was any good, if it made any money. "Because when I'm painting, the world goes quiet," she admitted, her voice softer than it had been in the cafe. "All the noise, the rent, the bills, the exhaustion, it all just fades away. It's the only time I feel completely free." He understood that, the desire for quiet. His life was a constant cacophony of demands, threats, and expectations. With her, walking by this simple stream, he felt a measure of that quiet for the first time. "What do you paint?" he asked. "People, mostly," she said. "Faces. I like trying to capture the story in their eyes." She glanced at him, at the scar above his brow. "Everyone has a story." He wanted her to paint him. He wanted her to look at him for hours, to learn the lines of his face, to try and capture his story. The thought was so intimate, so possessive, that he had to physically restrain himself from saying it out loud. Instead, he changed the subject. "You were not impressed by the party." It was a statement, not a question. Hana gave a short, humorless laugh. "It's a world I don't understand. All that money and power, and everyone looked so miserable." His self-deprecating humor, dry and rarely used, surfaced. "We are a very miserable group of people." She stopped walking and looked at him, truly looked at him, not as a kingpin or a benefactor, but as a man. "Are you miserable, Ji-hoon?" The use of his first name, so natural on her lips, sent a jolt through him. No one called him Ji-hoon, except for Min-jun. To everyone else, he was Mr. Kwan, or Chairman. Hearing his name from her felt like a reclamation of a self he had long since buried. "I was," he answered, his voice raw with an honesty that surprised even him. "Before I saw you." Her breath hitched. The air between them crackled, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. His gaze was so intense, so focused, it felt like a physical touch. She could see the loneliness in his eyes, a vast, empty space that he was inviting her, and only her, to fill. She should have been scared. She was. But she was also drawn to that loneliness, to the surprising gentleness he showed only to her. It was a siren's call, pulling her toward a beautiful, dangerous shipwreck. The walk ended. They stood near a bridge, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. "So," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "do I still want you to leave me alone?" He waited, his entire being coiled in suspense. This was her choice, for now. Hana looked at his face, at the hope and the darkness warring in his eyes. She thought of her empty, quiet life. It was safe, yes, but it was also gray. He was a storm, a hurricane of chaos and power, but he was also the most vibrant, intense color she had ever seen. "No," she whispered, "I don't." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. He had won. The first battle, at least. Their dates after that were a study in contrasts. He tried to enter her world. He took her to crowded, noisy night markets where they shared skewers of tteokbokki, him looking endearingly out of place in his expensive coat. They went to an independent cinema to watch a bleak art house film she loved, and he sat through the whole thing without complaint, just so he could hold her hand in the dark. In return, she hesitantly entered his. He didn't take her to flashy clubs or opulent restaurants. Instead, he took her to a private gallery after hours, just the two of them, to see a new Monet exhibition. He watched her face, alight with wonder, more than he watched the paintings. He took her to a quiet, ridiculously exclusive restaurant with a view of the entire city, a constellation of lights spread out at their feet. "I feel like I'm on top of the world," she whispered, staring out the window. "You are," he said, his eyes only on her. She was falling, fast and hard. The wariness was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was being drowned out by the force of her feelings. He was surprisingly gentle, attentive. He listened. He remembered small things she told him, her favorite flower, a book she wanted to read, and they would appear, subtly, without the overwhelming fanfare of his initial gestures. He made her feel seen. He made her feel safe. The irony was not lost on her. The most dangerous man she had ever met was the only one who made her feel truly protected. One evening, he came to her small apartment for the first time. Sora made herself scarce with a theatrical wink. The space was cramped, her paintings stacked against the walls. Ji-hoon moved through the room with a surprising grace, his large frame never seeming out of place. He stopped in front of the new easel, which she had finally started using. On it was a half-finished canvas, a portrait of a man on the subway, his face etched with weariness and resilience. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice soft. He turned to another one of her finished pieces, a small, vibrant painting of a street food vendor, her face wreathed in steam. "I want to buy this." Hana laughed. "You don't have to do that. I can just give it to you." "No," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You are an artist. Your work has value. I will pay you for it. A real price." A week later, a prestigious gallery in Gangnam called her. The owner had seen an image of her street food vendor painting, sent by an anonymous but very influential collector, and wanted to offer her a solo exhibition. And they had an immediate buyer for the first piece, at a price that made Hana's head spin. She knew it was him, but he had done it perfectly. He had used his power not to give her a handout, but to open a door. He wasn't just buying her work, he was building her career, giving her the legitimacy she craved. It was the most thoughtful, most profound gesture of support she had ever received. That night, when he came to see her, she didn't thank him with words. She pulled him into her small bedroom, and for the first time, she let the last of her walls crumble completely. Their connection, which had been simmering with unspoken tension, finally ignited. It was not just passion, it was a desperate, tender collision of two lonely souls who had found their other half in the most unlikely of places. Lying in the dark afterward, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Hana allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe their two worlds, so far apart, could somehow coexist. It was a foolish hope. The shadows were always waiting. The first sign of trouble came a few weeks later. Ji-hoon had been more distracted than usual, his phone buzzing with cryptic messages he would answer with terse, one-word replies. One night, he was supposed to meet her for dinner, but canceled at the last minute. "Business," he'd said, his voice strained. "I'm sorry, Hana. I'll make it up to you." He showed up at her apartment after midnight. She opened the door, and her heart stopped. His suit was disheveled. There was a dark, spreading bruise high on his cheekbone, and a hastily bandaged cut on the back of his hand was bleeding sluggishly through the gauze. His face was a grim, exhausted mask. "Ji-hoon," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "What happened?" He tried to force a smile, but it was a painful grimace. "A business negotiation got intense." She pulled him inside, her hands shaking as she led him to the bathroom. She gently removed the clumsy bandage and cleaned the cut, her touch feather-light. It was a clean slice, deep and deliberate. This wasn't from a fall. It was from a knife. The idyllic bubble they had built around themselves burst with a deafening pop. The reality of his life, the violence she had tried so hard to ignore, was here, in her tiny bathroom, bleeding into her sink. "This isn't business, Ji-hoon," she said, her voice trembling. "This is what you do, isn't it? This is the Golden Dragon Syndicate." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. He saw the fear on her face, the dawning horror that was replacing the love and trust he had worked so hard to build. "Hannah," he started, but he had no words. No lies would work now. "I need to know," she insisted, her voice gaining strength, steeling itself. "I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more evasions. The truth. All of it." He knew this moment would come. He had dreaded it, tried to postpone it, but it was here. The final test. He could lie, try to soften the truth, but he owed her more than that. He owed her the ugly, brutal reality of who he was. He took a deep breath. "Not here," he said. "Come with me." He took her to his real office, not the polished corporate suite in the Golden Dragon Tower, but a command center, a fortress hidden in the sublevels of one of his properties. It was a room of cold steel, dark wood, and a wall of monitors displaying security feeds from across the city. It was the nerve center of his empire, the throne room of the kingpin. He stood in the center of the room, the city lights a distant, cold glitter through the reinforced windows. And he told her everything. He told her about his grandfather, who had built the syndicate from the rubble of the war with his bare hands and ruthless ambition. He told her about his father, who had expanded it, legitimizing parts of it while sinking others deeper into the darkness of extortion, smuggling, and violence. And he told her about himself, the heir, born into this life, trained since childhood to take the throne. "The Golden Dragon Group is real," he explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Our shipping and construction arms are legitimate, profitable businesses, but they were built on a foundation of blood and fear. They are protected by a shadow organization that answers to me. The men who did this to me tonight," he gestured to his bruised face, "were from a rival faction who believe my relationship with you has made me weak." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. Weak. She had made him a target. "I am the leader of a criminal enterprise, Hannah," he said, his voice flat and final. "There is violence, there is danger. It is my name, my legacy, and my burden. I never wanted it, but it is mine." He finally turned to face her, his eyes pleading, desperate. "But it doesn't have to touch you. I can protect you. I can build a wall around you so high and so thick that none of it will ever reach you. I can give you anything you want. A studio, galleries, a life where you never have to worry about money or safety again. Just stay with me." Hannah stared at him, her heart shattering into a million pieces. It was worse than she had imagined. Not just a shady businessman, a crime lord, a mafia boss. This wasn't a drama, this was real, and it was terrifying. All her principles, her belief in honesty and hard work, her aversion to power that came from hurting others, it all rose up in a sickening wave. He was offering her a beautiful, perfect cage, a life of luxury paid for by things she couldn't even bear to imagine. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. She thought of her mother, who had raised her to be proud and honest. She thought of her own reflection, the woman who wanted to be free. How could she be free in his world? "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Ji-hoon, I can't be that person. I can't live in that beautiful cage, pretending the bars aren't there." The hope in his eyes died, extinguished as surely as if she had thrown water on a flame. His face became a mask of stone, the kingpin reasserting control over the man. but she could see the devastation in the rigid line of his jaw, the tremor in his bandaged hand. "I love you," she sobbed, the confession making it all the more painful. "But I can't. Please, don't make me." He didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stood there, absorbing the blow. He had known this was a possibility, the most likely outcome, but knowing it didn't lessen the agony. He had shown her the monster, and she, quite rightly, was running from it. "I understand," he said, his voice a hollow echo in the sterile room. And so, she turned. She walked away from the man she loved, out of his fortress of steel and glass, and back into the ordinary, rain-slicked streets of Seoul. She walked away from the power, the danger, and the only love that had ever made her feel whole. He let her go. He stood behind the bulletproof glass of his penthouse office, a king in a sterile, silent castle, and watched her walk away. The part of him that she had awakened screamed at him to go after her, to drag her back, to promise anything. But the older, colder part, the part that was Kwon Ji-hoon, the chairman, knew that the most loving thing he could do was to let her escape his world, to let her be free. The silence closed in around him, vast and absolute. He was alone again. He was home. The days that followed were a grayscale misery. Hannah tried to slot back into her old life, but the shape of it no longer fit. The convenience store felt grayer, the customers more irritating. The extra money in her bank account, the money from the gallery, felt like blood money. She went to her new, spacious studio, paid for by the sale of her painting, and stared at a blank canvas. She couldn't paint. Every color reminded her of him. The deep blue of the night sky on the river, the warm gold of the lights in the restaurant, the stark, dangerous black of his sweater. Sora tried to help. "You did the right thing, Hannah," she said, her voice soft. "You stood by your principles." But at night, alone in her bed, Hannah would cry. She missed his voice. She missed his quiet intensity. She missed the impossible safety she felt in the arms of the most dangerous man in Seoul. She had chosen her principles over her heart, and the victory felt exactly like defeat. For Ji-hoon, the world lost its flavor. He threw himself back into his work with a renewed, terrifying ruthlessness. He crushed the rival faction that had dared to touch him, not with the calculated precision he was known for, but with a brutal, overwhelming force that left even his most hardened men unnerved. He was a machine of cold logic and violence, the gentle, vulnerable man Hannah had known, locked away in a deep, dark vault. "You need to be careful," Min-jun warned him one night, as they stood in the silent command center. "You're making enemies, Ji-hoon. You're acting on emotion." "I have no emotions," Ji-hoon stated, his eyes fixed on a security feed showing the entrance to Hannah's apartment building. He had men watching her, invisibly, ensuring her safety from a distance. It was the only thing he could still do for her. His father, Chairman Kwon, was pleased. "I see the girl is gone," he said one day, a rare, thin smile on his lips. "Good. She was a distraction, a weakness. Now we can get back to business. The Park family has a daughter. An alliance would be beneficial." Ji-hoon looked at his father, at the man who had forged him into this weapon, and felt a lifetime of resentment calcify into a hard, unshakable resolve. His father saw Hannah as a weakness, but Ji-hoon knew the truth. She was the only strength he had ever had. Being with her had made him feel powerful. Ruling this empire without her just made him feel empty. He had let her go because his world was too dark for her. The thought, which had once seemed noble, now seemed like a coward's excuse. What if, instead of banishing her from his world, he changed the world for her? The idea was insane, suicidal. The Golden Dragon Syndicate was a centuries-old beast. To try and change its nature would be like trying to teach a shark to be a vegetarian. It would turn on him. It would devour him. He looked at the painting he had bought from her, the one of the street food vendor, which now hung in his sterile penthouse. It was the only splash of color, the only piece of humanity in the entire space. He thought of her face when she talked about her art, the way she lit up. He thought of her quiet strength, her unwavering principles. He wanted to be a man who deserved a woman like that, not a man who had to cage her to keep her. That night, he called a meeting, not with his captains, but with a team of the most ruthless lawyers and financial analysts in the country. He walked into the boardroom, and for the first time in his life, he was going to war not with fists and knives, but with contracts and loopholes. The next day, he confronted his father. Chairman Kwan was in his study, a room that smelled of old leather and tyranny. "I will not be marrying the Park family's daughter," Ji-hoon said, his voice calm and steady. His father looked up, his eyes cold. "You will do as you are told. It is for the good of the family." "No," Ji-hoon replied. "The good of the family has been an excuse for brutality and corruption for too long. Things are changing. I'm changing them." He laid out his plan, a systematic, multi-year transition. He would leverage the illegal assets, one by one, and fold them into legitimate, publicly traded corporations. He would cut ties with the old world gangs, absorb what he could, and destroy what he couldn't. He would scrub the Golden Dragon name clean, even if it meant sacrificing half their wealth to do it. His father stared at him, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "You are a fool. You are spitting on your grandfather's grave. The family will not stand for it. They will tear you apart." "Let them try," Ji-hoon said, his eyes like chips of ice. "I am the chairman now, and this is my decree." The war began. It was a silent, brutal conflict fought in boardrooms and back alleys. Some of his father's loyalists turned on him. There were threats, attempts on his life that his security, led by a grimly determined Min-jun, managed to thwart. He was working 20 hours a day, fueled by coffee and a singular, desperate hope. He was dismantling his own kingdom, piece by bloody piece, to build a new one worthy of his queen. Min-jun watched his friend, his boss, drive himself to the brink of exhaustion. He saw the dark circles under his eyes, the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. But he also saw a fire in Ji-hoon's eyes that had been missing for years. The fire Hana had lit. One day, on his own initiative, Min-jun went to the little cafe near Hana's apartment. He found her there, staring blankly into a cup of coffee, a sketchbook lying untouched on the table. She looked thin, her vibrant energy dimmed. He sat down opposite her. She looked up, startled, recognizing him from the party. "I'm not here on his orders," Min-jun said quickly. "He doesn't know I'm here. He would be furious." Hana's expression was wary. "What do you want?" "I just thought you should know," Min-jun said, his voice low and earnest. "What he's doing." And he told her. He told her about the war with his father, about the plan to legitimize the entire syndicate. He told her about the threats, the danger, the sheer insane ambition of it all. "He's tearing down the castle brick by brick," Min-jun finished, his gaze steady. He told his father he was doing it to become a man who deserved to even stand in the same room as you. "He's risking everything, Hana. Not to get you back, but to be worthy of you." Hana listened, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm. Every word was a revelation. He wasn't just missing her. He was changing for her. He was undertaking an impossible task, fighting a war against his own history, his own family, all for her. Her principles had demanded she leave him, but his actions, this grand, earth-shattering gesture of change, were proving that his love for her was more powerful than the darkness she had feared. Her love for him, she realized in that moment, was stronger than her fear. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice shaking but clear. Min-jun gave her an address. It wasn't the Golden Dragon Tower. It was a small, chaotic office space in a much less glamorous part of town. The headquarters for his new, legitimate venture. Hana ran. She ran through the streets of Seoul, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She didn't care about the danger anymore. She didn't care about the principles that now seemed so small in the face of such a monumental love. She only cared about him. She found the office, a mess of whiteboards, stacked documents, and half-empty coffee cups. And in the middle of it all, there he was. He was leaning over a table, his sleeves rolled up, his hair a mess. He looked exhausted, stressed, and more handsome than she had ever seen him. He looked up, sensing her presence, and his eyes widened. For a moment, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. The noise of the office seemed to fade away into nothing. Hana walked toward him, her steps sure and steady. She didn't stop until she was standing right in front of him. He straightened up slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and raw, unguarded hope. There were no words. None were needed. All the pain of their separation, all the fear and longing culminated in that one silent moment. She reached up, her hand cupping his bruised cheek. He flinched almost imperceptibly, then leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if in prayer. And then he was kissing her. It wasn't a gentle, tender kiss. It was desperate, possessive, a starving man's feast. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights and impossible battles, of regret and redemption. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, her arms wrapping around his neck, anchoring herself to him. It was a promise, a homecoming, a new beginning forged in the ruins of the old world. When they finally broke apart, breathless, they rested their foreheads together. "I'm not leaving again," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. He pulled her tighter against him, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in. "I know," he murmured, his voice cracking with an emotion he no longer had to hide. "I know." 1 year later, the war was not over, but the tide had turned. Kwon Ji-hoon, with Hana by his side, had successfully dismantled the most toxic parts of his inheritance. He had made powerful enemies, and his father was now a bitter recluse, but he had built something new. The Golden Dragon Group was still powerful, but its power now came from innovation and legitimate business, not fear. The path had been bloody and treacherous, but it was a path toward the light. He and Hana lived not in the sterile penthouse, but in a warm, comfortable house with a large, sun-drenched studio for her. The walls were filled with her art, vibrant canvases that told stories of resilience and hope. She was a celebrated artist now, her success entirely her own. Yet she was his fiercest supporter, his quiet counsel, his reason for everything. He was still intense, still decisive, still the most powerful man in any room he entered. But the cold loneliness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a warmth that was reserved only for her. He had not just changed his world for her, she had saved him from it. He had found his redemption not in power or wealth, but in her love. And she, the resilient heart from the working-class streets of Seoul, had found a love strong enough to conquer her fears and a home in the arms of the kingpin who had torn down his kingdom just to be her king. This story teaches us that love's true power lies not in possession, but in its ability to inspire profound change. It suggests that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to fight for it, and that true strength is found not in embracing darkness, but in having the courage to step into the light for the person you love. It's a testament to the idea that a worthy love is not one that asks you to sacrifice your principles, but one that inspires your partner to become a person who aligns with them. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The journey of Ji-hoon and Hana explores complex themes of duty, personal integrity, and the transformative nature of love, reminding us that even in the face of immense darkness, the choice to change for the better is always possible. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more emotional tales, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of love and redemption. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Comment below. What would you have done in Hana's place when she learned the truth about Jihoon's family? Would you have left? Or would you have stayed? And finally, help us choose our next story. Let us know in the comments which narrative you'd like to see next. A. The story of Minjun, the loyal lieutenant, as he navigates the new, legitimate world Jihoon has built and finds an unexpected love of his own. B. A prequel story, detailing the rise of Chairman Kwan and the dark choices he made to build the Golden Dragon Syndicate from nothing.